Welcome back. I have got Kavitha with us now. That was horrifying, a thoroughly unpleasant watch, which it always was going to be. Um, Sorry, a bit traumatized by that because it's something different, isn't it? Seeing everything that's happening on the ground. Um, so I want to apologize to all of the attendees for the absolutely horrific imagery. If it's hard to watch on TV, imagine what it's like to be living it. Kavitha, thank you so much for joining. We are so honored to have you come and join us. This is a film screening of your amazing documentary with a lot of our supporters and friends of the Balfour Project who are regular givers, who are bread and butter, who keep us going in our aim to educate and advocate for the issue of Israel Palestine, specifically here in the UK where we're based. But it's always fascinating to get an insight into what's going on across the pond, because obviously that does influence so much what's going on here, sadly. I wanted to ask you a few questions, and then I'm going to open up the chat so that people from the audience can also ask some questions. I will do that now. But can I just ask you what motivated you to, for start, get involved in this issue, Israel-Palestine, and what led ultimately to the making of this film?
Yeah, so I'm a freelance journalist now, but I worked at Al Jazeera English for a very long time and was working for them when we started doing this documentary. And the show I was at was Fault Lines that did this kind of our remit within the network. Because obviously Al Jazeera is covering what's happening in Gaza 24 hours a day. But our remit, especially as a documentary show, is to focus on the US role in a story, which obviously in this case is very clear. But, I think the main thing to me from the beginning was that we were going to have to focus on the US and, some of the, I guess, politics of what they've been doing, but we didn't want it to just be that. We wanted to anchor it in what the US support has meant for civilians and how that's kind of, reflected across these three families and the attacks that they lost loved ones in, but that they've survived and really what that meant. So, one of the main things was we knew we had to start with the bombing campaign, because when we started really thinking about how to do this, it was honestly, we started talking about it in October of last year. And naively, I think we thought or hoped, honestly, I think we hoped that it would be over soon. I think in our head, we were thinking about the previous wars. And again, I guess that was looking back on it now, it feels quite naive. But, when it became clear that when we didn't really know what the end was going to be, and I hate to say it feels like that now too, that we'd have to start with the bombing campaign because has been such a horrific and crucial part of the way this war has been waged. And then we wanted to look at, the quote unquote safe zones, because when we were starting to look into this, particularly from the US angle, the Biden administration for a long time consistently referred to that as some, kind of adequate measure. It was very clear very early on that it wasn't an adequate measure. And that the fact that, quote unquote safety or humanitarian zones are still being attacked as recently as the past week. And then we wanted to, in December is when we started to really when the ground troops had, such a firm hold of the North, we started to get more and more allegations of arbitrary executions of civilians. So that's why we wanted to look at one of those cases, which was the case of the Salem family at the end of the film, who also survived that horrible airstrike at the beginning. And as we were going along, the attack on Hind Rajab and her relatives happened. And we felt like we had to cover that because not just because it was such a heartbreaking case, but because it highlights a really crucial part of the US relationship with the Israeli military, which is that when there are attacks like this, and this goes back to before October 7th, for instance, in the case of our colleague Shireen Abu Akleh, who was killed in the West Bank, after she was killed, the US had said, well, we're going to initially, Blinken said that he wanted an independent investigation, but then they started deferring to the Israeli investigation, which is something they always do, and they did it in the case of Hind Rajab and her family. despite the fact that those are not credible investigations. So that's kind of the way we try to approach it.
Yeah, I always think it's interesting when people investigate themselves and find that they've done nothing wrong.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting way of doing things.
Yeah.
Um, I was so pleased to see Agnes Callamard, Amnesty International Secretary General, before we started the film. I mentioned that we had our annual conference in June, and she spoke at it. She's
Okay.
fantastic. And
She's
obviously,
amazing.
yeah, when she spoke at our conference, and I posted a link in the chat box, we've got the highlights reel that's come out. So if anyone wants to watch that, it's a 20-minute highlight reel, as well as a conference summary brochure, which summarizes some of the key points and takeaways. But she was speaking to our audience, obviously mainly from a view of the UK government and how it relates to the UK, not that dissimilar to how it relates to the US, and how complicit our governments are in these war crimes. And she states repetitively that there's no evidence of of military targets in a lot of these attacks. And
Yeah.
in the film, it mentions the US military assistance to Israel. I mean, what we're talking about here is $1 billion industry of arms trade. And I did a talk recently and I had to do some research on that. I didn't realize that 99% of guns in Israel that the Israeli army use are imported. I presumed that they produce more themselves. I don't know why, but it shows their heavy reliance on this industry and this trade, and how much perhaps an embargo, how much of an impact it might have on their actions.
Yes, without a doubt.
Yeah. I'm gonna start with a question from my dad, because I'll be in trouble if I don't. So my dad, Afif Safie, for those of you who don't know, he was an ambassador here in the UK, but also the representative of the PLO mission in the States for a while. So he asks, he's not great at technology, so he's written it on a bit of paper and sent me a picture on WhatsApp. So
That's amazing.
no, he's adorable. Hi, Pops. Don't you find it paradoxical and intriguing that in Israel Palestine, the oppressor hates the victim much more than the victim hates the oppressor?
Wait, sorry, say that one more time.
Don't you find it paradoxical and intriguing that in Israel Palestine, the oppressor hates the victim much more than the victim hates the oppressor?
Oh, that is an interesting question. I mean, to me, I always come at it from, just thinking about the US role, but I think about it a lot in terms of the media industry's role. And this maybe isn't the best answer, but something that I think about a lot just as a journalist is that, because that question, just to be honest, it makes me think of the way that Palestinians are so dehumanized. And as a journalist, I feel like the entire industry, particularly the US and in the US, media organizations have, and again, I think this is from before October 7th, but especially like in the way that this, Gaza's been covered, is that you see that dehumanization of Palestinians so clearly in the way they have covered, or in a lot of cases not covered, what's happening. So I don't know if that's the best answer, but that's where my mind went.
Well, he's not commented in the chat box, which means
Okay.
he's happy with that answer.
Okay.
So. You talked about in the film, we talked about the Leahy Law and investigating. We talked about it just now, investigating the acts of Israel. Who do you think should be doing that? And more importantly, maybe, who do you think the US would listen to if they investigated?
That's a great question. I mean, I find when it comes to the Leahy Law, so that is really supposed to be that is the key domestic human rights law in the US. And I think, but this speaks to a lot of how the way things happen in DC is that everything gets watered down. There's a reason that the State Department has been able to circumvent the actual meaning of the Leahy Law. When I remember when we interviewed Josh Paul about it, one of the things I kept wondering was, how is the State Department allowed to essentially not follow the Leahy law, and to apply different standards, not just to Israel, in fact, but there's 3 countries that essentially, for all intents and purposes, get a pass when it comes to the implementation of the Leahy law. It's Israel, it's also Egypt and Ukraine. But nobody's enforcing it. There is an inspector general of the State Department, but they answer to the Secretary of State, which doesn't really do anything. So these systems, I think the way that they currently are, it would take Congress holding the State Department accountable, which is really where the key where all of this lays, is with the State Department and the White House. And if an idea, unfortunately, Congress isn't going to do anything. They are trying to think of a diplomatic way to say this. They have no interest in upholding human rights law. Honestly, that is, I think, the sad truth about the U.S. Congress.
Well, then my next question, Kamala Harris, how do you think things might be different or the same if she comes into power?
I mean,
Trump.
I think we can only go on what she said, and from what she said, it won't be any different whatsoever than what we've seen with the Biden administration. There have been reports that she would have a different kind of core team. So Blinken would be gone. Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, would be gone. And they are 2 of the main people who have been driving the Biden administration policy. But at the end of the day, it is Biden. Biden is I don't think he's like all other US politicians who view Israel Palestine, I guess if you wanted to stay in terms of US strategy and interests in the Middle East. I think the reality is that Biden is through and through, like, emotionally has a connection to Israel, and has since he became a senator in the 70s. And so that's why he's a kind of, that's the only difference I can really come to, honestly. But with Kamala Harris, she, I think, has made it, again, I'm going based off what she said, most recently at the debate, what she said at the DNC, that that support for Israel will never change. So yeah, and there will never be any conditions on arms.
Yeah, that's the impression I got as well, but
yeah,
you can't help but be hopeful.
Yeah. I mean, and just one other, the thing about that is every time that she has said that, or administration official has said that there won't be conditions on arms, that's just them then contradicting, the Leahy law. The Leahy law is actually supposed to be a condition on US arms to foreign countries, or US assistance, military assistance to foreign countries. And to say that there will never be any conditions on US arms to Israel is literally saying that US law does not matter. So I think her law and order stance only applies in certain situations.
That's really unfortunate and very depressing.
Yeah.
The amount of sadness you saw firsthand while making this film, how do you cope with that?
So obviously, like, I wasn't on the ground, since foreign journalists aren't allowed into Gaza. To me, anytime I feel like I get depressed or overwhelmed with what we're seeing happening to Palestinians, all I can think about is what the people on the ground are going through and what our colleagues have gone through. And I just realized it doesn't do anybody good if I'm sad or feel overwhelmed, which, like, maybe isn't the best way to approach it, but it's the only way I know how, is I just think about them and what they're going through, and I don't know how they've done it, frankly.
I don't know how anyone copes with what people are going through. I just can't even imagine it. The only thing I can think is that it's just so overwhelming that they've not been able to process what they're going through properly. Because how can you? And yes, that feeling of, if it's hard enough for me sitting in my comfortable home in safety, then how has the film, what has the response been to the film? Where have you been able to show it?
It's been a good response. So obviously it's online, so anybody can see it. I will say that within 5 days or so, YouTube age restricted it. and which was not surprising. We kind of expected them to do that. They've done that with other Palestine related content. But what happens when you do that is that then it kind of automatically stops the views. It stops people. It never gets suggested if people are on YouTube, that kind of thing. So that kind of it still was getting views, but that was unfortunate. But otherwise, we've done a few screenings. We did one on the sidelines of the DNC, and there were a couple of congresswomen who spoke at that. So that was good. I think we're hoping though that we can. We're so honored that you organized this, because the more people that can watch it, as long as to us, it feels like it, to a degree, it feels like it's outdated, just because I feel like everything has gotten so much worse on the ground since this came out in June. But if it serves as a way to keep Gaza in people's minds when the media coverage of it is, dropping rapidly, even as things get worse on the ground, if it can keep people talking about it, then that's, our hope.
Yeah. Well, we will be sharing links to how people can watch the film online as well,
Okay.
so that anyone who missed it can catch up with it. Anyone who's watched it today can share it far and wide. It's a difficult watch, as we said, but it is so important. I wondered whether you noticed any difference in reaction or response to your film based on, how did the different religious groups respond, or different communities? Have you had different responses in different countries?
I don't really know, to be honest. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest. I think I haven't really paid attention to who's responding from where, to be very honest. So yeah, I don't have a good answer to that.
Well, I will, of course, forward you any of the responses
I would
uh,
love that.
from
Good or
our
bad.
audience.
Criticism is welcome too.
Constructive feedback we will
Yeah.
accept. I just want to say a little reminder to everyone in the audience, please do post any questions you have in the chat box. As you can see, I have a whole long list of my own questions for Kavitha, because that film really was very moving to me for many different reasons. I also just want to take a quick moment to remind everyone, if you missed at the start, that we have a bunch of upcoming events that we are super proud of and excited about sharing with you. We've got one on the 2nd of October, How to Prevent the Erasure of Palestinians. So that one is about the cultural erasure of Palestine, with Tamara El Halawani and Dr. Zahira Yasser. So they're two fabulous women talking about this subject that is so important. And then we also have Helena Cobham on the 24th of October, talking about understanding Hamas, Palestinian resistance from the PLO onwards, because whether we like it or not, Hamas are here and need to be involved in whatever, I would love to say solution, but whatever further ongoing situation we have there in Gaza. I was just wondering, do you know if Biden has seen your film?
I mean, that would be great, but I doubt it. I mean, he couldn't even be bothered to speak to the family of the US activist that was killed last week in the West Bank. So, yeah.
That's interesting. I was going to ask if you knew, if you had any ideas about how that might affect the states, because we've seen responses here, different senators talking about how that poor woman was an activist and involved in terrorist activities and blah, blah, blah.
Oh,
Again,
wow.
dehumanizing, yeah, rather than protecting one of their own civilians, really.
I mean, I think the unfortunate reality is that the only way anything would happen here in the States is if political journalists who are constantly covering the administration were to, ask about it every day. And I don't see that happening, honestly, the way that the political press is here.
Yes,
Yeah.
that is a whole other topic, the media in the States, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I just wondered, what's next for you? Have you got any other projects in the pipeline?
I mean, I'm hoping to still do work related to Gaza, but I've just been researching stories, honestly, at the moment. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we didn't cover in the film, just because it's its own topic, is the attacks on healthcare workers and hospitals. So I did reporting like separately from the film about that, but I'm hoping to continue doing that, specifically about the way that a lot of healthcare workers and doctors in Gaza have essentially been disappeared into Israeli prisons, and as well as killed. So yeah, one of the doctors I've been in touch with before the first attack on Nasser Hospital in Han Yunis was taken and is currently in Offer prison. So yeah.
We've got some questions coming through. Can I remind you, if you've got a friends link, that you've come under your name on Zoom is Friends of the Balfour Project. So if you ask a question and you want me to mention your name, if you could put your name in there, that would be really handy, because I have one comment, which is a response to my dad's question. One answer to Afif Safi's question is that the Israelis hate the Palestinians as a kind of defense mechanism, because deep down they know they are guilty of crimes with which they are too familiar from their own history. The Palestinians know they have justice on their side and justice will out. One would hope. But we've got another question, which is interesting. As you know, we're based in the UK, and our main focus is educating the British population on the historic responsibility of Britain in Palestine, obviously with the mandate that was held there and so forth, and also advocating and lobbying in the British government. So we've got a question here. What can we, Friends of the Balfour Project, do in practice to change the situation and the attitude of the US administration towards the behavior of the IDF in Gaza? We feel so impotent.
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I wish I had a good answer. I think the only thing, I think is people can speak out. And that's really, and I would say supporting independent media to, I usually just kind of have to bring it back to, I feel like the media has a role to play, both positive and negative in Gaza. And so I think like if you can support the media that is doing a good job, that's always a good that's one small way, especially the organizations that work with journalists on the ground who need that support.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. And I'm happy to give my personal opinion that Al Jazeera is fantastic in terms of being able to get news that is fact-checked and accurate, because obviously there's a lot of emotional stuff going around. There's also a lot of misinformation, let's call them lies, going around on all sides. So it is important to, like you say, support the media outlets that are telling the stories, but also the ones that are telling the accurate, true stories.
Right.
Say. Yes, so again, I would like anyone to post any questions in the chat box, and also any comments on the film, because I'm sure a lot of you have had an emotional response to that, and a physical response. I was crying through a lot of it. I wondered if you had any opinions. We've had the question about what we can do from here in the States. Do you have any recommendations about what we can do here in our home country? I know that's outside of your remit. I don't know how much you are involved in the UK.
I have to be honest, I do not have a good handle on UK politics. I have too much of a handle on US politics, frankly. That's kind of where my brain is.
We've got a question here from, my answer to that question, my own question would be, keep an eye on our emails that we send out as the Balfour Project. We often put in there if there's any actions and call to actions for the general public that can make a difference. We've got, yes, so question from Tim Llewellyn. He wanted to ask about Al Jazeera in the US. It's incredibly well respected here in the UK and widely watched by people, even those that are not that close to the Middle East. What is the feedback in the States? How popular is it? How respected or not respected is it in the US?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So it's Jazeera is it's online in the US. It's not like on any broadcast. It's not a broadcast here or anything. But I think generally, for instance, like to the response to the film in the US has been very good. And I think it's been helpful for people to see that, just because it's not, you don't really see this coverage in US media, frankly. And especially connected to the way what the administration is doing and what our taxpayer dollars are funding. So I think that in that sense, the feedback from people in the US has been really good.
Yeah, I am always shocked when I go to the States and watch the mainstream news. It's like nothing I've ever seen. It's almost funny if it wasn't so serious.
Yeah.
So I've got another question from Lika. It would be helpful to know which news websites independent Kavitha is referring to. I look at Al Jazeera channel. Are there any others that you recommend?
Sure. I mean, the ones that come to mind, again, I'm always having kind of a US focus, but there's two sites. I mean, The Intercept is very good, I think, when it comes to covering Gaza, and they're not a news site, but Airwars and Forensic Architecture, obviously, who are both in the UK, though, they do such crucial work when it comes to investigations on human rights issues that I think they could use that support, because it is hard in this environment. I know it is hard for a lot of these outlets and research organizations to cover this because there's so much pressure on them not to cover it. So I would say that. And there's a new site launched by a couple of people from The Intercept called Drop Site, and they've done some very good reporting on Gaza already. So those are the ones that come to mind. But yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you
Mhm.
for those recommendations.
Mhm.
We have a question about the US law on sales. I think it's Leahy law. I will spell that out.
Mhm.
Someone is asking what it is called. I am posting it in the chat box. We've
Yeah.
got a comment from Sarah Philps, who I know well from her support of St. John Eye Hospital, which I have worked with. Speaking of healthcare in Gaza, they have an amazing hospital in Gaza, which unfortunately is not being used now because it's been attacked. It's was housing refugees for a while, but now I think that it is unable to be even
Wow.
safe haven safe haven, but a place where refugees can stay. But she says it's just a comment, but I wanted you to hear it. Congratulations, Kavitha, on such a brilliant documentary. In our media, Palestinians are often just numbers. Showing the horrors through families and individual stories is so effective. And I agree.
Thank you.
I love that balance of telling some real stories and then supporting it with the facts and the laws and so forth. I think that is a super effective way of doing it. So I just wanted to thank you for your human touch in doing that.
I mean, it's thanks to I mean, we're just honored that those families were open to speaking with us, while, after the trauma they've gone through, while they're just trying to survive. And I think one of the things, for us when we were thinking about how to make it is, when you're on so much of the war, because this is being live streamed, that this genocide is being live streamed, but we're seeing so much of it on our phones or on social media. And so, but it's easy then to kind of just keep scrolling and not stay with these families. So that was one of the things that we wanted to do.
You did it so well. You did it so well. Well, I'm going to let you get on with your evening, and as well as all of our attendees. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And Kavitha, thank you so much. You are now in the Balfour Project family, FYI. So if you are ever in London, we hope that you come along and meet us all, because you're absolutely fantastic and we really appreciate the
Thank
work you're
you.
doing. And like I said, we're going to be sharing this film far and wide, and we hope we wish you all the best.
Thank you so much for organizing this. It means a lot.
I would say it was our pleasure. That's not the
Yeah.
right word.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
But it was definitely our honor, and especially to have you come and speak to us as well after that. So best of luck, and thank you everyone again who tuned in. I hope you have some way of decompressing after that, because that was a lot. But we really appreciate you coming along, watching that, taking your time to watch that. When you really don't have to. So it means a lot that you do. And we hope to see you at future Balfour Project events. You too, Kavitha.
Yeah.
Have a lovely, lovely evening. All the
Thank you
best.
so much.
Bye.
All right. Bye.